The kingdom knew only silence from its king. For 300 years, Calian, the vampire sovereign of the Northern Reach, had ruled from a throne of polished obsidian, his heart as cold and unmoving as the stone itself. His castle, Viridian Spire, pierced the clouds, a monument to immortal power and glacial order. In the halls below, courtiers moved like ghosts, speaking in hushed tones, for the king's sorrow was a legend woven into the very tapestries. He had loved once, a mortal woman named Lyra, and her death had entombed something vital within him. Now, he was a ruler of perfect emotionless efficiency, hearing petitions, signing decrees, and gazing at the moonlit mountains with eyes that reflected nothing. Tonight was no different, or it shouldn't have been. Calian stood in his private observatory, a room of glass and silver, reviewing scrolls that detailed border disputes and trade quotas. The harvest moon hung outside, a bloated orange sphere that bathed the world in a sickly light. He should have been focused on the report from the eastern marches. Instead, a faint, discordant sound was fraying the edges of his concentration. It was not a sound that belonged in Viridian Spire, not in the polished halls, not near the royal chambers. It was a thread of misery, thin and desperate, weaving up through layers of granite and mortar. At first, he dismissed it as the wind whistling through a distant arrow slit, or perhaps the groan of the ancient plumbing. He dipped his quill into ink, the scrape of the nib against parchment unusually loud. But the sound persisted. It was not the wind. It was weeping. A human sound. A fragile, broken thing. It should have been insignificant, a droplet in the ocean of noise a castle produces. But this was different. It didn't just reach his ears. It slithered into the hollow space where his heart used to beat and echoed there, a lonely, aching pulse. It was the sound of utter abandonment, the kind of crying that comes when all hope is gone and only the raw animal need to grieve remains. Calian's hand stilled. The quill hovered above the parchment, a single drop of black ink falling to blur a line about grain shipments. He hadn't felt anything in centuries. Not curiosity, not anger, certainly not this pull, this compulsion. The weeping was a hook in his chest, and someone was pulling the line. With a frown that felt unfamiliar on his features, he set the quill down. His movements were silent as he left the observatory and entered the main corridor. The sound was clearer here, a directionless whisper of pain. He passed 2 guards, their armor gleaming in the torchlight. They bowed deeply, their eyes wide with surprise at seeing him outside his chamber so late. "Your Majesty," one murmured. Calian did not acknowledge them. He was following a trail only he could hear. The sound led him away from the grand staircases, away from the opulent halls, toward the older, darker parts of the spire. He found himself at the head of a narrow, spiraling staircase he hadn't descended in over 100 years. The air grew colder, damper. The scent of dust and damp stone replaced the perfumed oils of the upper floors. This was the path to the old dungeons, the oubliettes, the places where things and people were sent to be forgotten. Why would crying come from there? The active prison blocks were on the higher levels. These deep cells had been sealed by his own command decades ago, after a particularly brutal uprising. A cold, sharp feeling, something akin to dread, but sharper, pricked at him. He descended. The torchlight grew sparse. The air thickened with the smell of mold and something else, something metallic and stale, old blood, old fear. The weeping was no longer a whisper. It was a raw, ragged sobbing that seemed to soak the stones around him. It was coming from behind a heavy, iron-banded door at the very end of the lowest corridor. The door was slightly ajar. A single rusted bracket held a guttering torch, casting dancing, monstrous shadows. Callian approached, his immortal senses parsing the scene. The cell was a black maw, but his eyes, older than the kingdom itself, saw perfectly. In the far corner, on a pile of filthy, rotting straw, a figure was curled into itself, small, human, female. Her dress was little more than rags, her dark hair a matted curtain hiding her face. Her shoulders shook with the force of her despair. She was whispering between sobs, words too broken to understand. He stood in the doorway, a statue of shadow and power, watching this shattered creature. He should have felt nothing. He had presided over wars, over executions. Suffering was a component of eternity. But this was different. This was not the cry of a warrior defeated or a criminal facing justice. This was the sound of a soul being slowly erased in the dark, alone. Before he could speak, before he could even understand why he was there, her whispering resolved into words. They were not a plea for help. They were a plea for an end. Please, no more. Just let it be over. I can't remember the sun anymore. The words, spoken with such exhausted finality, did something to the ice around Callian's soul. It cracked. A fault line sheared through 3 centuries of numbness. He found his voice, and it emerged rougher than he intended. Who are you? The figure jolted, a frantic scramble backward until she hit the slimy wall. She dragged the hair from her face, and the dim torchlight caught her eyes. Time stopped. The world tilted on its axis. Callian's dead heart gave a single, violent, painful thud against his ribs. He was looking at Lyra. Not a resemblance, not a vague similarity. It was her face, the exact curve of her cheekbone, the shape of her brows, the way her lips, now chapped and bleeding, were slightly fuller on the bottom. And her eyes, goddess, her eyes, even wide with terror and red from crying, they were Lyra's eyes, the color of moss after rain, the eyes he had watched close for the final time 300 years ago. This was impossible, a trick, a hallucination born of his own eternal grief. He had buried her. He had felt her last breath against his palm. He had mourned until mourning became a void. The woman, the ghost, stared at him, her terror momentarily overshadowed by confusion. She saw a tall, pale figure silhouetted in the doorway, dressed in fine, dark fabrics that marked him as nobility, as one of them. Are you here to finally do it? Have they sent you to kill me? Just make it quick, please. I'm so tired. Callian could not move. He could not breathe. The scent of the dungeon, the decay, her fear, mixed with the ghost of Rosewater from a memory centuries old. His mind screamed that this was a descendant, a cruel trick of lineage. But his soul, the part he thought long dead, whispered something else. Your name, he demanded, the command laced with a desperation he didn't recognize. She blinked, as if the question was absurd. Soraya, she whispered. My name is Soraya. Soraya, not Lyra. The name was a splash of cold water. It was close, achingly close, but different. The shock receded slightly, leaving behind a roaring, cold fury. Someone had put a woman with his dead love's face in a forgotten hole to die. He took a step into the cell. She flinched, pressing harder against the wall. He could see the details now, the bruising on her arms, the gauntness of her face, the grime etched into her skin. She had been here for a long time, weeks, perhaps months, abandoned. How long? His voice was a low growl, vibrating with a rage that was both ancient and newborn. I don't, I don't know. The dark. It's always dark. A fresh tear traced a clean path through the dirt on her cheek. They took me at the river crossing. I had healing herbs for the blight in Oakhaven Village. They said it was forbidden. They said I was a thief stealing from the court physicians. A weak, broken sound escaped her. I asked for a judge. They laughed. They threw me in here and said the dark would teach me my place. Every word was a coal dropped onto the kindling of Callion's fury. He ruled this kingdom. He was the law. And in the darkness beneath his feet, his law had become this: torture and abandonment for a healer carrying herbs. Without a word, he crossed the cell. She flinched, pressing harder against the wall. He could see the details now: the bruising on her arms, the gauntness of her face, the grime etched into her skin. She had been here for a long time, weeks, perhaps months, abandoned. Take her, his voice said, again a low growl. It didn't invite argument, it was fact. She was leaving this place. He carried her out of the cell, her head lolling against his chest. She was too weak, too shocked to protest. As he walked back down the corridor, past the other sealed doors, he made a silent vow. He would burn this corruption out of his kingdom, starting with the man who had ordered this. But first, he had to save the ghost in his arms, the woman with Lyra's face and a name that was not hers. The journey back to the upper levels was a blur. Servants froze, their faces masks of shock. Courtiers whispered behind their hands. The Vampire King carrying a filthy, half-dead human woman through the heart of his palace. The rumors would fly before dawn. He took her not to the guest wings, not to the infirmary, but to his own private sanctuary, a suite of rooms no one but his most trusted servant had entered in a century. He laid her on a divan near the fire, the silken fabrics a stark contrast to her filth. She was already slipping into unconsciousness, the brief surge of adrenaline spent. Callion rang a silver bell. Within moments, an elderly vampire with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression appeared. Elias had served the royal family for 500 years. His eyes widened at the scene. Elias, Callion said, his voice returning to his customary cool control, though his eyes burned. Summon Thasan immediately. Bring everything needed for a human on the brink of death. Food, water, medicines, and silence, Elias. Absolute silence about this. Elias bowed, his professionalism overriding his shock. At once, Your Majesty. He hesitated. Shall I call for maids to attend her? No, not yet. Go. Alone again, Callion knelt beside the divan. Soraya's breathing was shallow. He reached out, his fingers hesitating for a moment before brushing a strand of matted hair from her forehead. The touch sent a jolt through him, a painful, electric remembrance of life. Who was she? Was this fate's cruel joke, or was it something else? A test? A second chance wrapped in tragedy? He didn't have the answers, but as he watched the fragile rise and fall of her chest, one thing became violently, undeniably clear. The silence of his reign was over. The crying from the darkness had been heard, and the Vampire King, for the first time in 300 years, was awake. Chapter 2. The Ghost in the Firelight. Thasan, the court physician, was a vampire of few words and immense experience. Her examination of Soraya was swift, clinical, and her diagnosis was delivered with a grim finality that chilled the air more than the mountain winds outside. Severe dehydration, advanced malnutrition, contusions, lacerations, evidence of prolonged physical stress. Her spirit, Thisan paused, her sharp eyes glancing from the unconscious woman to the king, who stood like a sentinel by the fireplace. Her spirit has been near broken, Majesty. Another week in that hole, and we would not be having this conversation. It would have been a coroner's report, not a physician's assessment. Callian absorbed the words. Each one was a lash against the image he held of his own kingdom, orderly, just, civilized. Can she be healed? The body, yes, with constant care. Clean water, nourishing broth, rest and time. The mind and spirit. Thisan shrugged, a gesture of centuries of seeing such damage. That is a different kind of healing. It requires safety, it requires kindness. It may never fully mend. I will see that she has it, Callian stated, his tone leaving no room for doubt. All of it. Thisan's eyebrow arched. You intend to oversee this care personally, Your Majesty? I do. You will instruct me. The physician looked as though she might argue, but one look at the king's expression, a mask of icy determination with fire behind the eyes, silenced her. She simply nodded. Very well. We begin now. For the next hour, Callian became a student. Thisan showed him how to trickle water between parched lips without causing choking, how to prepare a thin, nutrient-rich broth, how to clean the shallow wounds on Soraya's hands and feet with a salve that smelled of honey and thyme. He learned to watch for the signs of fever, the tremors of shock, the shallow breathing of deep exhaustion. He absorbed the information with the same strategic focus he applied to matters of state, but his hands, usually so steady when signing death warrants or moving armies on a map, trembled slightly when dabbing the salve on a scrape across her knuckles. Finally, Thisan left with a promise to return at dawn, leaving a small apothecary's worth of supplies and instructions. Elias brought the broth and fresh linens, his eyes carefully avoiding the king's face as he set them down and retreated. And then, Callian was alone again with the ghost. Soraya slept, but it was not a restful sleep. She twitched, small whimpers escaping her, her face contorting with unseen fears. Each sound was a needle prick to Callian's newfound, raw sensitivity. He pulled a chair close to the divan and sat, resuming his vigil. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows. In the flickering light, the resemblance to Lyra was less stark, more nuanced. Soraya's face was younger, perhaps. There was a slight difference in the set of her jaw, a tiny scar near her hairline that Lyra never had. She was herself, and yet... He must have dozed, a light trance vampires fall into rather than true sleep, because the next thing he knew, a soft, confused sound brought him alert. Soraya's eyes were open. They darted around the opulent room, taking in the high ceiling, the rich tapestries, the roaring fire, the man watching her from a chair. Panic flared in those green depths. Where, Callian said, keeping his voice low and even, you are safe. Safe? She repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. Her gaze locked on him. You were in the dark. You carried me. Memory was returning, bringing fear with it. She tried to push herself up on her elbows, but her arms gave out. A frustrated, frightened tear leaked from the corner of her eye. Why? What do you want from me? The question was so stark, so devoid of hope, it struck him harder than any physical blow. I want nothing from you, he said, and it was the truth in that moment. You were unlawfully imprisoned. I am remedying that failure. She stared at him, skepticism warring with exhaustion. You're a noble, a vampire. You rule this place. The failure is yours, then. There was no malice in her words, only a blunt, weary statement of fact. I inclined his head, accepting the truth of it. It is, and I intend to understand how it happened. He reached for the cup of water. You need to drink. She eyed the cup with distrust, but her thirst was a more immediate master. He helped her lift her head, supporting her with one hand while holding the cup to her lips with the other. She drank in small, desperate sips, water trickling down her chin. When she finished, she sank back, her energy spent. You remind me of someone, she said suddenly, her eyes studying his face with an unsettling clarity. In the cell, When you first spoke, there was something in your voice, something old and sad. The observation was so perceptive it unnerved him. She was seeing past the king, past the vampire, to the centuries of solitude. I knew someone who looked very much like you, he admitted, the words feeling dangerous. A long time ago. Did she die? She asked, with the brutal simplicity of one who has faced death intimately. Yes. I'm sorry. The apology was automatic, hollow from her own suffering, but it was offered. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds of the fire popping and Soraya's ragged breathing. What is your name? She finally whispered. The guards, they just called you Your Majesty. I am Callian, King of the North Reach. A flicker of something, not surprise, but a grim understanding crossed her face. The king himself, of course. My luck would see the king find me just to watch me die in nicer sheets. You are not going to die, Callian said, the force in his voice making her blink. You can't know that. I am deciding it, he replied, and the ancient, immutable power in that statement hung in the air between them. It was not a threat to her, but a promise to the universe. You will live, Soraya, and you will tell me who put you in that cell. At the mention of her imprisonment, she shrank back into the pillows, a shadow crossing her features. Does it matter? He was just a man in uniform, doing what he thought he was supposed to do. They all are. It matters to me, Callian said, and the ice was back in his tone, but it was not directed at her. A name, Soraya. She closed her eyes, as if pulling the name from a dark, painful place. Captain Vorgon. He commands the border guard at the Silver Shallows crossing. He said my herbs were contraband. He said healers like me were parasites. He took my satchel, my tools, and threw me in a cart. The last thing he said was that the oubliette would make me humble. A single hard tear escaped. I think he just forgot about me. Vorgon. Callian committed the name to memory. It was a starting point. Rest now, he said, his voice softening marginally. No one will harm you here. As her eyelids fluttered closed, she murmured one last thing, so faint he almost missed it. The dark was so loud. Long after her breathing evened out into true sleep, Callian sat, staring into the fire. The dark was so loud. He understood that sentiment in a way few immortals could. His own darkness, the void left by Lyra, had been a roaring silence for 3 centuries. Elias entered silently some time later, bearing a tray. Your Majesty, you should eat, and there is a matter that requires your attention. Callian looked up. Vorgon? He has been detained and awaits your pleasure in the West Study. Elias's face was grave. And the audit of the dungeons, as you ordered, the preliminary findings are troubling. How troubling? Elias swallowed. There are others, sire, in the sealed levels, forgotten. The fury that had been simmering within Callian erupted into a cold, focused inferno. He stood, his motion fluid and deadly. Have Thesson remain outside this door. No one enters but her or you. Understood? Understood, Majesty. Callian took one last look at Soraya, sleeping fitfully by the fire. The ghost was safe for now. It was time to hunt the men who trafficked in ghosts. He left the room, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees in his wake. The compassionate caregiver was gone. The king of the Northern Reach, the ancient predator, had taken his place. The reckoning was about to begin. The West Study was a room of knowledge and judgment. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held histories, legal codices, and philosophical treatises. A massive desk of ebony wood dominated the space, its surface bare save for a single stark ledger. Behind it, the massive window framed a view of the jagged, moonlit peaks, a view Kalian usually found centering. Tonight, it looked like the teeth of a beast. Standing before the desk, flanked by two royal guards, was Captain Vorgon. He was a picture of military arrogance even in detention. His uniform was impeccable, his back straight, his chin lifted in a show of defiance that was already beginning to crack at the edges. He expected a reprimand, perhaps a demotion. He did not expect the icy, murderous aura that filled the room as the king entered. Kalian did not sit. He walked around the desk to stand directly before Vorgon, close enough that the captain could see the ageless, depthless black of the king's eyes. Captain Vorgon, Kalian began, his voice deceptively quiet. You arrested a human healer named Soraya at the Silver Shallows 6 weeks ago. Vorgon's eyes flickered. He hadn't expected the name. Yes, Your Majesty, a clear case of smuggling and unauthorized practice. The medical compliance edicts are quite specific. The edicts, Kalian interrupted, his tone like a scalpel, pertain to the regulation of commercial apothecaries and physicians within city limits. They say nothing about village healers treating blight with local herbs. The captain's confidence faltered. It is understood, Majesty, that all healing arts fall under court purview for quality and safety. Understood by whom? Kalian asked, taking a half-step closer. By you? By whom did you receive this understanding? Show me the decree. Cite me the clause. The captain's mouth opened, then closed. He could not. It was common knowledge, a self-serving interpretation that had hardened into unjust law. Kalian picked up the ledger from his desk. This is the prison register for the sealed oubliettes. Soraya's name is entered. Date of arrest, no trial date, no medical notation, just an entry, and then silence. He dropped the ledger on the desk with a sound like a tomb slamming shut. You logged her into a low level and left her there to die. Explain that. Sweat beaded on Vorgon's brow. The lower levels, Majesty, they are for low-priority cases. Humans, mostly. We lack the resources to process them all through the high courts. It is a matter of efficiency. Efficiency. Kalian repeated the word as if it were poison. So, human lives are low priority. Their right to a trial is an inefficient use of resources. His voice dropped to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. Tell me, Captain, how many other low-priority souls are moldering in my dungeons on your orders? Vorgon's gaze darted to the guards, finding no solace there. I would have to consult the records. I have consulted them. Kalian's hand shot out, gripping the front of Vorgon's uniform. The move was so fast it was a blur, the strength behind it inhuman. He lifted the captain an inch off the ground. 23 names, Vorgon. 23 people you deemed unimportant enough to forget. 3 of them are dead, their deaths unrecorded, their families unknowing. Do you know what that is? Vorgon could only shake his head, his breath coming in short gasps. That is not efficiency. That is not justice. That is murder by neglect, and you presided over it. Kalian released him, and Vorgon stumbled back, clutching his throat. Who else? This corruption does not exist in a vacuum. What noble found it convenient to make troublesome humans disappear into your efficient system? The captain was broken. The military bearing was gone. replaced by the trembling of a cornered animal. "Lord, Lord Malcor," he gasped, "and his circle. They would give me names, people who spoke against them, or who had debts, or romantic entanglements that became inconvenient. I would have them arrested on minor unprovable charges. The oubliette did the rest. They promised me protection, promotion. Malcor, a senior member of the High Council, a vampire of old lineage and immense wealth. Kalian felt a fresh wave of disgust. This rot went to the very heart of his court. "You are relieved of your command, Vorgon. Your titles are forfeit. You will be held until a public tribunal determines your fate." Kalian turned to the guards. "Take him to the high cells, not the oubliettes. I want him to remember what sunlight looks like before his judgment." As the guards dragged a sobbing Vorgon away, Kalian turned to Elias, who had been waiting silently by the door. "Lord Malcor and every name in his circle, arrest them, now. Seize their estates and records. I want every piece of evidence of this enterprise." "It will cause an uproar, Your Majesty," Elias said quietly. "They are powerful." "Their power ends tonight," Kalian said, his gaze returning to the mountains. "Let the uproar come. Let the whole rotten structure scream as I tear it down. Send word to the High Justice. We convene a special tribunal at dawn. And bring me the full audit of the dungeons. I want every forgotten soul brought to light, fed, healed, and their cases reviewed by noon tomorrow." Elias bowed. "And the woman, Soraya?" Kalian's rigid posture softened by a fraction. "She is to be protected as if she were the crown itself. Double the guard on this wing. No one enters without my express permission. And Elias, have the gardeners cut fresh roses from the south terrace. Bring them to her room." The request was so unexpected, so incongruous with the wrathful king of a moment before, that Elias could only blink. "Roses, sire?" "Lyra loved roses," Kalian said simply, and the pain in those 3 words was a universe of loss. He did not wait for a response. He left the study, his mind already shifting from the hunt to the healing. The ghost needed more than safety. She needed a reason to believe the sun still existed. Back in his chambers, he found Soraya awake again, propped up on pillows, staring at the flames as if they held answers. She looked slightly better, a faint hint of color returning to her cheeks. Thiessen had been in and changed her into a clean, soft nightdress. She looked up as he entered, her green eyes wary but clear. "You were gone a long time," she said. "There were things that needed to be corrected." He walked to the fireplace, leaning against the mantel. "The man who put you in that cell, Captain Vorgon, is in custody. He named others, powerful others. They are being arrested as we speak." Soraya absorbed this. "You moved quickly. 3 centuries of rule teaches one that corruption, like poison, must be cut out immediately, or it spreads to the heart." He paused. "There were others in the dark with you, Soraya. Many others. I did not know." She looked down at her hands, clean now, but still too thin. "I heard them sometimes, whimpering, crying, then silence. I always wondered when my silence would come." The stark horror of her words filled the space between them. Kalian had no comfort to offer for such a truth. Instead, he said, "Their silences will be answered. They are being brought into the light. They will have justice." Justice. She tested the word. What is justice for stolen weeks in the dark, for the fear that eats your mind? "I do not know," Kalian admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "But it begins with acknowledgement, with the truth, and with ensuring it never happens again." Just then, Elias entered carrying a crystal vase overflowing with deep crimson roses. Their fragrance, rich and sweet, instantly permeated the room. He set them on a table near Soraya's divan, bowed, and left. Soraya stared at the roses, her eyes wide. She reached a trembling hand toward them,
stopping just short of touching a velvet petal. "Roses," she whispered. They have a scent. I had forgotten." Kalian said softly, watching her face. She looked from the roses to him, her expression unreadable. "You keep her memory alive with flowers." "I kept it entombed in ice," he corrected, his voice rough. "Until tonight." He met her gaze. "You asked me what I want from you. I want nothing. But your presence, it has cracked the ice, Soraya. And for that, I owe you a debt I cannot possibly repay." She pulled her hand back from the roses, wrapping her arms around her. Don't owe me anything. I'm just a woman you found, a woman who looks like someone you lost. That's not a gift, that's a curse." "Is it?" Kalian asked, genuinely curious. "To me, it feels like a question has been asked by the universe, a question I thought was answered and closed 300 years ago. I do not know what the new answer is, but I intend to find out." Soraya held his gaze for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. In that look, he saw not Lyra's gentle love, but Soraya's own fierce, battered intelligence. She was not a ghost. She was a survivor. "The dark was loud," she said again, her voice firmer. "But in here, with the fire and the roses, it's quiet. It's a different kind of quiet." Kalian nodded. "Then let it be quiet. Rest. The world and its justice will wait." As she settled back, her eyes lingering on the roses, Kalian felt the first faint stirrings of something he had long buried. Purpose, not just as a king, but as a man. The ghost in the firelight was not Lyra. She was a catalyst, and the storm of change she had unleashed was only beginning.
Chapter 4. The Council of Shadows. Dawn found Kalian not in his chambers, but in the Hall of Whispers, the cavernous chamber where the High Council of the Northern Reach convened. The name had never felt more apt. The counselors, 13 ancient vampires representing the oldest bloodlines, sat in high-backed obsidian chairs arranged in a semicircle. The air thrummed with a tense, hostile silence. News of the night's events, the king's descent into the dungeons, the human woman in his rooms, the arrest of Captain Vorgan, and, most shockingly, the seizure of Lord Malcor and his allies, had spread like wildfire. Kalian sat upon the dais, his posture regal and utterly unyielding. He had not slept. The scent of roses and illness from his chamber still clung to him, a stark contrast to the cold, metallic smell of power in this room. Lord Valerius, the eldest counselor, with a face like carved limestone, broke the silence. "Your Majesty, the actions of this past night are unprecedented. To arrest Lord Malcor, a pillar of this court for 5 centuries, on the word of a disgraced guard captain and the presence of a single nameless human, it smacks of impulsivity, of dangerous sentiment." "It is not sentiment, Lord Valerius," Kalian replied, his voice echoing softly in the vast space. "It is justice. The audit of the sealed dungeons is complete. 23 souls forgotten, 3 dead from neglect. This was not an oversight. It was a system, a profitable one from Malcor and his clique, who used my prisons as a dumping ground for their enemies and inconveniences." Another counselor, Lady Cyrene, her beauty as sharp as shattered glass, leaned forward. "And the human, Majesty, this Soraya. It is said you keep her in your own chambers, that you tend to her yourself. The court whispers. They say she resembles the lost queen." Her words were a carefully aimed dart. Kalian's expression did not flicker. "The condition of my guest is not a matter for this council. Her resemblance to my past is a private grief, not a public policy. She is a victim of the corruption you all failed to notice festering beneath our feet. Her recovery is a matter of basic decency, which seems to be in short supply." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The king had never spoken to them with such open contempt. "Decency is one thing, Majesty. Instability is another. You have shaken the very foundations of the court. Malcor's allies are many. Their businesses, their trade routes, their military connections, they are woven into the fabric of the realm. To tear them out so violently risks unraveling everything. Then let it unravel. Kalian's voice cracked through the hall like a whip. He stood, his presence suddenly dominating the space. What is this realm if its fabric is woven with the suffering of the forgotten? What is our immortal power worth if we use it to allow humans, our subjects, our charges, to be erased in the dark for profit and pettiness? You speak of foundations. The only true foundation of a kingdom is justice. Without it, we are no better than the savage warring clans I unified 3 centuries ago. We are just monsters in finer clothes. He looked at each counselor in turn, his gaze piercing. Malcor's tribunal will be public. The evidence will be presented for all to see. Every noble implicated will face judgment. And when it is done, we will rebuild. Not on old, rotten alliances, but on new laws. Laws that protect the weakest among us as fiercely as they protect the strongest. Laws that make a dungeon like the one beneath us impossible. He paused, letting his words sink into the stunned silence. Your role, counselors, is not to protect the privileges of the corrupt. It is to help me govern a kingdom worthy of its name. You can aid in crafting this new justice, or you can be remembered as the shadows that tried to cling to the dark. The choice is yours. With that, he turned and strode from the Hall of Whispers, leaving a tempest of shock, fear, and brewing rebellion in his wake. He had not asked for their approval. He had declared a new age, and he knew with cold certainty that not all of them would follow. Back in the royal wing, the atmosphere was a different kind of tense. Thesson was waiting for him outside his chamber door, her expression grim. "How is she?" Kalian asked, his voice losing his imperial edge. "Physically improving, slowly. She kept down broth and a little bread. The wounds are clean, but, Your Majesty," Thesson hesitated. "She had a waking nightmare, a panic. She thought she was back in the cell. It took some time to calm her. The mind's wounds are deeper." Kalian's jaw tightened. What does she need? Patience, consistency, a sense of true safety, and perhaps a purpose. Lying in a room, even a beautiful one, with only her fears for company, is its own kind of prison. Kalian nodded, absorbing this. He entered the chambers quietly. Soraya was sitting by the window now, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the sunlit mountains. The roses stood beside her, bright against the gray stone vista. She turned as he entered, and he saw the lingering shadows of her panic in the tightness around her eyes. "Thesson tells me you had a difficult morning," Kalian said, coming to stand a respectful distance away. She gave a small, brittle laugh. "I forgot where I was. The blanket felt like straw. The shadow in the corner looked like a cell door." She shook her head as if angry at herself. "It's foolish. I'm safe. I know I'm safe." "Knowing and feeling are not the same thing," Kalian said. He gestured to the window. "The view from here is unparalleled, but it can also feel distant, unreal." She looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing the fatigue in his ageless face. "Your counsel did not go well." He was surprised by her perception. "It went as expected. Change is never welcomed by those who profit from the old ways." "You're fighting for me, for what happened to me, and it's causing you trouble." "I am fighting for the truth," he corrected gently. "You are the embodiment of that truth, a living testament to the failure I must now fix." He paused. "Thesson suggested you might need a purpose, something beyond recovery." Soraya's brow furrowed. "What purpose could I have here? I'm a village healer. I know herbs and fevers and setting bones, not court politics." "Then let us start with what you know. The edicts that Vorgan misused, they are being rewritten. Who better to advise on what village healers truly need, what laws would help rather than harm, than a village healer herself?" Her eyes widened. "You want my advice on laws?" "I want your truth," he said. "The truth from the ground, not from a throne. When you're stronger, we can talk. You can tell me about Oakhaven, the Blight, and what it means to heal when you have no license but the trust of your neighbors." For the first time since he'd found her, he saw a spark in Soraya's eyes that wasn't fear or pain. It was interest, a flicker of her old self. "I could do that," she said softly. Then her expression clouded. "But the court, they'll never listen to a human, especially not one who looks like this." She gestured vaguely at her own face. "They will listen to me," Kalian said, and the quiet assurance in his voice was more powerful than any shout in the council hall. "And in time, they will listen to you, because your words will have the weight of lived experience. You are not a ghost, Soraya. You are a witness, and your testimony is about to change a kingdom." He left her then, with the sunlight on her face, and a new, fragile thought taking root in her mind. She was not just a victim to be healed. She could be a voice. It was a terrifying, exhilarating thought. Meanwhile, in the deepest, most secure cell of the high prison, not an oubliette, but a place of cold, clear light, Lord Malcor was not despairing. He was plotting. Stripped of his silks, he nonetheless held himself with an air of imperious dignity. He had been visited by a discreet guard, one whose loyalty gold could still buy. "The king is moved by this human woman," the guard whispered through the feeding slot. "He defends her, keeps her close. She is his vulnerability." Malcor's lips curled into a thin, cruel smile. A plan, dark and subtle, began to coalesce in his ancient mind. The king thought he was rooting out corruption, but corruption, like a weed, could grow back stronger if you nourished its roots with the right kind of poison. And what better poison than doubt, than suspicion, than the age-old vampire disdain for mortal weakness? "Spread a new whisper," Malcor instructed, his voice a mere breath. "Do not attack the king. Question the woman. Where did she truly come from? Why does she bear the lost queen's face? Is it nature or dark magic, a ploy by our enemies to enchant the king and destabilize the realm? Let the court wonder if she is a victim or a very clever weapon." The guard nodded and melted back into the shadows. Malcor leaned back against the cold stone. Kalian had the power of a king, but Malcor had the patience of a spider and a web of whispers that stretched into every corner of Viridian Spire. The battle in the council hall was over. The war in the shadows had just begun. Chapter 5. Whispers and Willow Bark. The following days in Viridian Spire existed in two contrasting worlds. In the sun-drenched royal chambers, a fragile recovery continued. In the shadowed halls and corridors, a venomous rumor took root and spread. Soraya grew stronger. She could walk the length of the sitting room without aid. Her cheeks lost their terrifying hollows. With the San's permission and under Kalian's watchful eye, she began to take small walks on the private, south-facing balcony, her face tilted to the sun like a flower. Kalian often joined her, their conversation slowly moving past her immediate ordeal. One afternoon, as they sat amidst potted citrus trees, she spoke of her craft. The blight in Oakhaven wasn't a true blight. It was a poisoning, runoff from Lord Malcor's new silver mine upstream. The water made the crops sick, then the people. The court physicians prescribed expensive tonics from the city. I used charcoal, milk thistle, and willow bark. It cost nothing but time. Kalian listened, truly listened. "And this is why you were targeted, not because you broke a law, but because you offered a solution that exposed a problem and threatened a profit." She nodded, a flicker of old anger in her eyes. "Vorgan didn't care about the herbs. He cared that I was drawing attention to the sick villagers who might start asking why they were sick. Your knowledge saved lives. That knowledge will be the cornerstone of the new edicts. We will establish clear boundaries, court oversight for major cities and trade, but protection and support for traditional village healers. Your testimony will be vital." Soraya looked down at her hands, now clean and healing. "They will hate me for it. The court physicians, the alchemists' guild, everyone who profited from the old way." "Let them hate," Kalian said, a hint of his icy resolve returning. "Your value is not measured by their approval. It is measured by the lives in Oakhaven who breathed easier because of you." Their world, however, was not confined to the balcony. When Elias brought their midday meal, his usually serene face was troubled. "Your Majesty, my lady, there is talk in the lower halls." "What manner of talk?" Kalian asked, though a cold part of him already knew. Elias chose his words carefully. "They question the coincidence of Lady Soraya's appearance. Some whisper it is too perfect, that perhaps the Eastern Coven or another enemy has found a way to influence your judgment through enchantment or artifice. They call her the Willow's Shadow, implying a false face grown from dark magic." Soraya's face went pale. The piece of bread in her hand trembled. The fragile sense of safety she'd been building shattered like glass. She was not just an inconvenient victim. She was being cast as a villain, a sorceress. Kalian's expression turned to stone. "The source?" "The whispers are everywhere, sire. No single source. But they started in the servants' halls near the prison wing after a guard was seen taking extra rations to Lord Malcor's cell." Malcor. Even in chains he was weaving his webs. Kalian felt a murderous rage, but he banked it. This was a battle of perception, not just power. "Thank you, Elias. That will be all." When they were alone, Soraya spoke, her voice small. "See? This is what I bring you. Not just trouble with your nobles, but doubts about your sanity. They think you're bewitched." He moved to kneel before her chair, putting himself at her eye level, a gesture of profound humility from a king. "Soraya, look at me. I am 342 years old. I have fought wars against mind mages and blood witches. I know enchantment. I know artifice. What I feel in your presence is not a spell. It is the thawing of a frozen heart. It is the sound of my own conscience, which I silenced for too long. They whisper because they are afraid, afraid of the change you represent, afraid of a king who remembers how to feel. Do not let their fear become yours." His words were a lifeline. She clung to them, searching his eyes for deceit and finding only fierce, unwavering certainty. "What do we do?" she whispered. "We do not hide," he said, rising. "We do not cower. We continue. Tomorrow, you will feel strong enough to walk with me to the palace library, publicly. Let them see you. Let them see that you are not a specter or a spell, but a woman of flesh and blood and keen mind. Let me treat you with respect, not obsession. Truth is sunlight, Soraya. The best remedy for shadows is to flood them with light." The next day, he did exactly that. Dressed in a simple, elegant gown provided by a now sympathetic Dasan, Soraya walked beside King Kalian through the grand gallery toward the library. Her steps were slow but steady, her head held high despite the hammering of her heart. The courtiers they passed fell into a stunned silence, then erupted into frantic whispering the moment they passed. The stares were like physical blows, curious, hostile, calculating. But Kalian was an immovable mountain at her side. He spoke to her about the architecture, the history of a tapestry, his manner casual and respectful. He did not hold her arm possessively, but offered it as support, which she took, drawing strength from his solid presence. In the library, a vast cathedral of knowledge, he brought her to the botanical and medical sections. "The court physician's manuals are here," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet space. Several scholars and a few nobles, pretending to read, watched intently. "But so are the old herbal compendiums, written by healers like your grandmother. Which texts would have helped you in Oakhaven? Which are wrong? Show me." It was a masterstroke. He was not presenting her as a fragile victim or a mysterious enchantress. He was presenting her as a colleague, an expert. Tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, Soraya began to speak. She pointed out a manual that recommended a dangerous mercury solution for skin rashes. She found an old herbal that correctly identified the use of willow bark for pain, but warned of its dosage. Her voice, though soft, was clear and sure. She was in her element. The watching court saw not a witch but a scholar, not a pawn but a person. The whispers in that room for a moment changed tone, from suspicion to surprise, from disdain to dawning curiosity. As they left the library an hour later, Soraya felt a strange exhilaration mixed with exhaustion. I think some of them were actually listening, she murmured to Kalian. They were, because you gave them something more interesting than gossip. You gave them your competence. That is a power no whisper can erode. But in the deepest shadow of a marble column, a figure watched them leave. It was not a noble, but a servant, one whose loyalty owed to Lord Malcor. He saw the king's attentive posture, the woman's intelligent gaze. He did not see a bewitchment, he saw something perhaps more dangerous, a genuine connection. And he knew his master would want to know that the poison of doubt needed to be made stronger. The king's vulnerability was not that he was enchanted, but that he...
The day of the public tribunal dawned clear and cold. The Hall of Justice, rarely used for its original purpose in recent centuries, was packed to its vaulted ceilings. Nobles in silks and furs jostled for space with commoners from the city who had heard the shocking tales. A palpable mix of anticipation, anger, and fear hung in the air. Kalian sat on the high judge's bench, not as king, but as presiding magistrate. He was a figure of austere authority, his black judicial robes making him seem even more pale and formidable. To his right sat the High Justice, an ancient vampire whose face was a network of wrinkles, and to his left, a representative from the Merchants' Guild. The message was clear. This judgment would be multifaceted. Lord Malcor, Captain Vorhin, and 6 other accused nobles were brought in chains to the center of the hall, standing in a pool of light from the great overhead oculus. They looked diminished under the gaze of the crowd. The proceedings began. Court scribes read the audit findings, the 23 forgotten names, the 3 dead. They presented ledgers showing bribes paid to Vorhin and correspondence between Malcor and his circle ordering the disappearance of specific individuals. They called witnesses, guards who confessed their part, merchants who had been threatened, and finally, one of the freed prisoners, an elderly bookkeeper who had criticized Malcor's tariffs. His testimony, halting and terrified, of 2 years in silent darkness, brought a wave of horrified murmurs through the crowd. Then, Kalian did the unexpected. The court calls Soraya of Oakhaven. A gasp rippled through the hall. All eyes turned to the side entrance. Soraya walked in, accompanied by Elias. She wore a plain dark blue dress, her hair simply braided. She was still thin, still bore the marks of her ordeal in the cautious way she moved, but her head was high. She avoided looking at the accused, focusing instead on the judge's bench, on Kalian. His gaze was her anchor. She was sworn in. The High Justice, his voice like dry parchment, began the questioning. He led her through her arrest, Vorhin's words, the journey in the cart, the descent into the oubliette. "Describe your cell," the old vampire intoned. Soraya closed her eyes for a moment, the memory vivid. It was stone, always damp. There was straw, old and rotten. It smelled of mold and hopelessness. A slot in the door for water, sometimes. No light, ever. The dark wasn't empty. It was full of sounds. Your own breathing, your heartbeat, the skittering of insects, and sometimes, from other cells, crying. Then, silence. Her voice, though quiet, carried perfectly in the hushed hall. It was not dramatic. It was devastatingly simple. She spoke of counting the water deliveries to mark time,
of the slow sapping of strength, of the moment she heard footsteps, Callion's footsteps, and believed they were coming to finally end her misery. When King Callion opened the door, the High Justice asked, "What did you think?" She looked directly at Callion then. "I thought he was death. I welcomed him." The raw honesty of the statement struck the hall into absolute silence. Here was no grand tale of rescue, but a stark confession of despair, so deep that death seemed a mercy. The High Justice turned to the accused. "Captain Vorhin, you heard this testimony. Do you deny it?" Vorhin, broken and pale, shook his head. "I do not deny. I followed orders. I thought it was the way things were done." "Lord Malcor," the justice continued, "these orders originated with you and your consortium. What say you?" Malcor, in contrast, was defiant. He drew himself up, his chains clinking. "I say we maintained order. These humans, these troublemakers, these debtors, they are a blight on the realm's stability. We removed a problem, efficiently, quietly. The king, in his newfound mortal sentimentality, calls it a crime. I call it governance." A few nobles in the crowd murmured agreement, the old guard clinging to privilege. Callion finally spoke, his voice cutting through the murmur like a blade. "Governance, Lord Malcor, is the protection of all subjects under the law. What you describe is tyranny. You did not remove a blight. You became the blight. You infected my justice system with your greed and cruelty, and you left innocent souls to rot as fertilizer for your power." He stood, addressing the entire hall. "The evidence is irrefutable. The testimonies are clear. This is not a matter of interpretation. This is a matter of fundamental betrayal. Captain Vorhin and his subordinate guards are hereby stripped of rank and titles. They are sentenced to 50 years of hard labor in the northern quarries, where they will see the sun every day and feel the weight of their actions in their bones." He turned his glacial gaze to Malcor and the other nobles. "Lord Malcor and your co-conspirators, you have violated the sacred trust of your station. You have subverted justice for profit. You have committed murder by neglect. Your titles are revoked. Your lands and assets are forfeit to the crown, to be used as restitution for the victims and their families. Your sentence is permanent exile to the shattered wastes, beyond the borders of any civilized realm. Should any of you ever set foot in the Northern Reach again, the penalty is immediate execution." The sentences were breathtaking in their severity. Exile to the shattered wastes was a death sentence, a slow, desolate one. The hall erupted. Some cheered, particularly the commoners. Many nobles looked pale and shaken. The king had not just punished the guilty, he had shattered the unspoken rule that the highborn were untouchable. As the condemned were led away, Malcor twisted in his guard's grip, his eyes burning with hatred. He did not look at Callion, he looked at Soraya. "You have won a battle, not the war. My friends are still out there. They will remember." The threat hung in the air as he was dragged out. The tribunal was over. Justice, harsh and brilliant as the light through the oculus, had been served. But as the crowd dispersed, buzzing with the news, Callion felt no triumph, only a cold certainty. Malcor's final words were not the ranting of a defeated man. They were a promise. The shadows still had teeth. Soraya, visibly trembling now that the ordeal was over, made her way to the bench. Callion stepped down to meet her. "You were extraordinary," he said quietly. "I told the truth," she replied, her voice thin. "It was heavier than I expected." She glanced toward the door where Malcor had disappeared. "He still has friends." "He does," Callion acknowledged. "And now they know the price of crossing me. The light has been shown. Their shadows will have to grow deeper and darker to hide now, and I will be watching." He offered her his arm. "Come, your part in this is done. You have faced your demons in front of the entire kingdom. Now let us go and breathe the free air." As they walked from the Hall of Justice, the crowd parted for them, their expressions now a complex mix of awe, fear, and respect. Soraya was no longer just the Willow's shadow or the king's mysterious guest. She was the woman who had stood in the light and spoken of the dark, and in doing so had helped bring down some of the most powerful vampires in the realm. She was a symbol, and symbols, Callian knew all too well, were both powerful and perilously fragile. The victory was real, but the battlefield had just expanded. In the week following the tribunal, a tense calm settled over Viridian Spire. The shock waves of the verdicts were still radiating outward, lands being seized, new overseers appointed, restitution being calculated. The king's new edicts on healing and justice were drafted with furious speed, their language clear and uncompromising. Soraya spent hours with scholarly scribes, her knowledge of village life and herbal lore being woven directly into the laws. She had a purpose, and it fortified her like nothing else. Yet the threat Malcor had hissed lingered. Callian doubled the palace guard, especially around the royal wing. He had Elias quietly vet every servant with ties to the exiled lord's household. The palace was a fortress, but Callian knew the most dangerous threats could already be inside, wearing friendly faces. Seeking a reprieve from the stone walls and watchful eyes, Callian began taking Soraya to the palace's most secluded space, the Starfall Garden. It was a walled sanctuary on the spire's eastern shoulder, accessible only by a single guarded gate. Here, night-blooming flowers perfumed the air, silver-leafed trees rustled in the mountain wind, and a natural spring formed a pool that reflected the constellations like scattered diamonds. It was here, centuries ago, that he had walked with Lyra. The first time he brought Soraya, she stood at the entrance, overwhelmed. It's not like the dungeon at all, she breathed, a simple statement that held worlds of meaning. No, Callian agreed softly. This is a place for life, for quiet. They walked along the gravel paths in a comfortable, new-found silence. The tension of the tribunal, the weight of the whispers, seemed to bleed away under the open sky. Here, they were not a king and a controversial witness. They were just Callian and Soraya, two souls marked by profound loneliness, finding an unexpected companion in the other. One evening, as they sat on a bench by the spring, Soraya broke a long silence. "You never speak of her, your Lyra." Callian watched the water ripple. It was a subject he had kept sealed tighter than any oubliette. But with Soraya, in this garden, the seal felt less necessary. "There's not enough time in eternity to speak of all she was," he began, his voice hushed. "She was sunlight. She was the reason I believed a vampire could be more than a predator. She saw the man I was before the crown, before the centuries, and she loved him." He paused, the old pain a familiar, dull ache. "The fever took her swiftly. I had all the power in the world, and I was powerless to save her. After that, the man she loved went into the ground with her. The king was all that remained." Soraya listened, her empathy a quiet presence beside him. "You loved her deeply. That doesn't just disappear. It becomes part of you. It's why you could hear me in the dark. That part of you, the part that loved her, was still there. It was just sleeping." Her words offered a forgiveness he hadn't known he needed. He had always seen his long numbness as a betrayal of Lyra's love. Soraya reframed it as a deep wound, a hibernation. "When I first saw you," he admitted, the confession pulled from him, "it was a shock, like seeing a ghost. But now I see only Soraya, the healer from Oakhaven, the woman who faces down a hall of vampires to speak the truth, the woman who knows the difference between Henbane and Hellebore. You have your own light. It is different from hers, but it is no less real." Soraya looked at him, her green eyes luminous in the starlight. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a story meant for someone else, like I'm wearing a face that invites comparisons I can never live up to." "You are not living her story," Callian said firmly. "You are writing your own, and it is a remarkable courage." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a small object wrapped in a piece of black velvet. I have something for you, a tool for your new story. Puzzled, she took it and unwrapped it. It was a pendant on a fine silver chain. The pendant itself was a delicate, masterfully crafted capsule of silver filigree. Inside, visible through tiny openings, was a compacted dark substance. It's a scent locket, Colleen explained. The court jewelers made it. Inside is a blend of herbs, willow bark, lavender, and rosemary, crushed and sealed. You said the dark had a smell of despair. I thought you should have a scent of your own choosing, of healing, of calm, of remembrance. If ever the shadows feel too close, you can open it, a different kind of dark, one you control. Soraya was utterly still, staring at the locket. Then her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming gratitude. No one had ever given her a gift so thoughtful, so tailored to the deepest wounds of her soul. It acknowledged her pain and offered her a weapon against it. It saw her, Soraya, the healer. With shaking hands, she fastened the chain around her neck. The locket rested cool against her skin, a tiny, potent promise. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Colleen replied. The simple, profound connection between them in that moment was more intimate than any kiss could have been. It was a meeting of scarred souls, an offering of understanding. It was in this moment of vulnerability that the attack came. It was not an attack of steel, but of stone. A figure, cloaked and moving with vampire speed, erupted from the shadow of a towering yew tree. Not aiming for Colleen, he was too well guarded, too powerful. The assailant hurled a heavy, jagged rock straight at Soraya's head. Time seemed to slow. Colleen moved, a blur of motion. He couldn't intercept the rock, but he could intercept her. He shoved Soraya backward off the bench, into the soft grass by the spring, throwing his own body as a shield over her. The rock whistled past, missing them by inches, and smashed into the bench with a crack that echoed through the garden. Before the assailant could flee or strike again, the guards were upon him. There was a brief, violent struggle, but the cloaked figure was outnumbered. They pinned him, wrenching back his hood. It was the servant, the one who had been watching them in the library. His eyes were wild with fanatical hatred fixed on Soraya. "For Lord Malcor, death to the mortal stain!" he screamed. Colleen rose slowly from protecting Soraya, his face a mask of terrifying, quiet fury. He looked at the captured assassin, then at the captain of the guard. "Take him to the interrogation chambers. I want to know every name, every plan, who he reports to, who paid him, who else is in this garden." Then he turned, all fury melting into urgent concern, and knelt beside Soraya, who was sitting up in the grass, shaken but unhurt, clutching the new locket at her throat. "Are you injured?" She shook her head, her breath coming in short gasps. You pushed me. The rock." "It doesn't matter." He helped her to her feet, his hands gentle but firm. The peaceful garden had been violated. Malcor's promise was not empty. His friends were here, inside the walls, and they were willing to kill. The attack proved two things starkly. First, Soraya's life was in tangible danger. The shadows were fighting back. And second, Colleen's instinct to protect her was not born of guilt or memory, but of something present and fierce. He had not hesitated to place himself in harm's way for her. As he escorted her back to the safety of the royal chambers, the starlight garden now feeling tainted, Colleen knew the quiet interlude was over. The conflict was escalating. They had won a legal victory, but they were now in a covert war. And in this war, Soraya was not just a symbol or a witness. She was the target. And Colleen would have to decide very soon how far he was willing to go to protect the light he had found in the darkness. A light that was uniquely, irrevocably her own. The interrogation chambers beneath Viridian Spire were a place of cold truth, not dank horror. Lit by bright, unwavering mage lights, they were designed to eliminate shadows where lies could hide. Here, the captured servant, his name was Jarek, sat chained to a simple metal chair. Kalian observed from behind a one-way mirror of polished obsidian, his expression unreadable. He had delegated the questioning to a spy master, a vampire named Kalen, whose voice was as calm and inexorable as a glacier. Torture was inefficient. Kalen specialized in the architecture of guilt, the leverage of fear, and the subtle art of revealing truth through the cracks in a story. For hours, Jarek held firm in his fanaticism. For Lord Malcor, a true son of the old blood, the mortal is a disease, he spat. Kalen merely nodded, unimpressed. Malcor is gone, Jarek, exiled. His wealth is forfeit. His allies are scrambling to distance themselves. Your loyalty is to a ghost who will never return to reward you. He leaned forward slightly. But your family, your sister works in the linen rooms, does she not? Your elderly mother lives in the city below, in a house provided by Malcor's former estate manager. Loyalty is noble, but is it noble to let them share your fate? Conspiracy to assassinate a royal guest is treason. The punishment extends to family. Jarek's defiance faltered. He had been prepared to die a martyr. He had not considered his sister being branded a traitor, his mother turned out into the street. Kalen saw the crack and applied pressure with surgical precision. He laid out documents, records of communications, lists of names of other disgruntled former retainers of Malcor. He showed Jarek evidence that he was not part of a grand rebellion, but a disposable tool, a fanatic sent on a suicide mission by cooler, smarter heads who remained in the shadows. They used your hate, Jarek, Kalen said almost sympathetically. They will mourn you not at all. They will find another angry soul to throw at the king, while your family suffers. The dam broke. Jarek's fanaticism crumbled into fear and then a desperate bargaining anger. He named names, not just fellow servants, but a minor court functionary in the treasury, a guard lieutenant in the city watch, and most damningly, a cousin of Lord Malcor, who had not been implicated in the tribunal, Lady Celine, a widow who lived in a distant manor, but who had visited the capital frequently. She said the king's weakness was the key, Jarek confessed, his voice now a defeated monotone. She said removing the human would break his spirit, make him reckless or despondent, that the old families could then restore order. She provided the gold. She knew the garden patrol schedules. Behind the mirror, Kalian's eyes turned to chips of black ice. Lady Celine. The web was more extensive, more insidious than he had feared. This was not a spontaneous act of revenge. It was a calculated political strike. In his chambers, Saria was under the protection of Thasan and 4 of Kalian's most trusted personal guards. The shock of the attack had given way to a cold, clear fear. The garden, her one place of peace, was now a crime scene. The locket around her neck felt both a comfort and a bullseye. When Kalian returned, his face was grave. He dismissed everyone, leaving them alone. He told her what Jarek had revealed. "So it's not over," Saria said, her voice surprisingly steady. The healer in her was diagnosing the problem, a systemic infection. They won't stop. As long as I'm here, as long as you're changing things, I'm a target. And you can't be my bodyguard forever. You have a kingdom to rule. Kalian knew she was right. The solution that had been forming in his mind since the rock flew through the air now crystallized. It was audacious, it was dangerous, but it was the only path that offered both protection and purpose. "Then we must make you more than a target," Kalian said, his gaze intense. "We must make you untouchable, not by hiding you, but by elevating you, by binding your safety directly to the stability of the realm itself." Saria frowned. "What do you mean?" "A formal pact," he stated. "Not of marriage, not of romance, a pact of mutual aid and protection, a binding magical covenant recognized by ancient vampire law. In the old days, it was used to seal alliances between vampire houses and powerful human communities. I would swear to protect you and champion your cause, the cause of justice and healing you represent. You would swear to advise me and serve as a living bridge to the human subjects of the realm. Your safety becomes a matter of state. An attack on you becomes a direct attack on the crown's sworn ally, Akasis Bali. It would force the shadowy ones into the open. They would have to challenge the pact itself, which is tantamount to challenging my right to rule. Saria listened, her mind reeling. It was a political masterstroke. It would give her an official, powerful status. It would force her enemies to confront not just a king's whimsy, but a cornerstone of his policy. But it was also a gilded cage. It would bind her to him, to this court, forever. I would be a prisoner of state, Saria whispered. You would be a partner of state, Kalian corrected gently, with rights, privileges, and your own authority. You would have quarters of your own, a household, a guard loyal to the pact, not just to me. You could continue your work, formally, establish healing schools, advise on laws. You would have power in your own name, Saria, the power to do the good you've always wanted to do on a scale you never dreamed of. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the fear of the commitment, the allure of the purpose. And what do you get from this pact, Kalian? Truly. He met her gaze without flinching. I get a conscience that walks and talks. I get a reminder every day of why the kingdom must be just. I get your friendship, forged in trust and mutual respect. And I get the certainty that the light I found in the oubliette will not be extinguished by cowardly stones in the dark. The honesty was disarming. He was not offering empty romance. He was offering a shared destiny, a partnership built on the rubble of corruption they had uncovered together. Saria looked down at the silver locket in her hand, thinking of Oakhaven, of the blight, of the forgotten souls in the dark. She had wanted to help. Here was a chance to help an entire kingdom. The price was her freedom as she knew it. But what was the freedom of a healer who could be snatched from a river crossing and forgotten? This pact offered a different kind of freedom, the freedom to act, to be heard, to make a difference. She took a deep breath, the scent of willow bark and lavender from her locket filling her senses. It was a scent of healing, of choice. I accept, she said, her voice gaining strength. A profound relief, deeper than he expected, washed through Kalian. Then we will do it publicly, in the Hall of Whispers, before the entire court. We will shine the brightest light possible on it. Let the shadows burn. The decision was made. The healer from Oakhaven and the Vampire King were no longer just rescuer and victim, nor just friends walking in a garden. They were about to become allies bound by magic and law. A new front in the war had just been declared, and Lady Selene, listening from her distant manor, would soon realize that killing a mortal woman had just become infinitely more complicated. The pawn had just been removed from the board, and a queen had taken its place. The Hall of Whispers was transformed. For the pact ceremony, Callian ordered the great black drapes usually covering the high windows to be drawn back. Morning sunlight, pale and wintry but unmistakably bright, streamed into the cavernous space, illuminating motes of dust that danced like gold. The symbolic meaning was not lost on anyone. Shadow was being banished. The court assembled under this unaccustomed light, a sea of murmuring speculation. The news of the assassination attempt and the subsequent arrests had everyone on edge. The summoning for a royal proclamation and covenant had set rumors ablaze. Was the king banishing the human? Was he declaring her a ward of state? Was he, as the most scandalous whispers suggested, going to make her his queen? Callian entered from the east door, dressed not in judicial black or martial silver, but in deep blue robes, edged with platinum thread, the color of twilight, of the moment between day and night. Soraya entered from the west, escorted by Elias. She wore a gown of forest green, the color of life and resilience, simple but beautifully made. Her silver locket gleamed at her throat. She looked neither like a victim nor a courtier, but like someone entirely new. They met in the center of the hall, under the main shaft of sunlight. The High Justice stood before them, holding an ancient tome bound in pale leather that was said to be human skin, a relic from a darker age, now used to seal a brighter one. "We gather," the justice's voice boomed, "to witness and bind a pact of mutual aid and protection under the ancient accords of stone and blood. King Calian, sovereign of the Northern Reach, do you swear to extend your personal protection, the might of your crown, and the pursuit of your justice to Soraya of Oakhaven, to champion her causes of healing and equity, and to uphold her safety as integral to the peace of the realm?" Calian's voice rang out, clear and absolute. "By my blood, my crown, and my honor, I swear it." The justice turned. "Soraya of Oakhaven, do you swear to lend your wisdom, your knowledge, and your voice to the service of the Northern Reach, to advise the crown truly on matters affecting its human subjects, and to uphold the just laws of this kingdom?" Soraya lifted her chin, her voice steady and carrying. "By my life, my craft, and my honor, I swear it." "Then, by the power vested in this office and before these witnesses, let the pact be sealed in symbol and in truth." A scribe brought forward a small, ornate silver dagger and a crystal vial. Calian took the dagger and, without hesitation, drew its tip across his own palm. Dark, almost black blood welled. He let several drops fall into the vial. He then offered the dagger to Soraya. Her heart hammered, but her hand was steady. She took the dagger, its weight unfamiliar, and mimicked his action, drawing a thin line across her palm. Bright red human blood dripped, mingling with his in the vial. The two bloods swirled, but did not mix, a helix of dark and light. The High Justice took the vial and poured a single drop of the mingled blood onto the open page of the ancient tome. Where it touched, the page glowed with a soft gold light, and words not previously there shimmered into existence. Their names, their oaths, the date. The pact was magically recorded, immutable. A collective intake of breath swept the hall. The magic was old and potent. This was no mere political announcement. It was a binding, supernatural contract. Calian turned to face the court, holding his bloodied hand, albeit it was already healing. "Let all present and all absent understand. Soraya of Oakhaven is now a sworn ally of the crown. Her person is inviolate. Her counsel will be heard in my chambers and in this hall. An attack upon her is an attack on the sovereignty of this realm, and will be met with the full, merciless wrath of the crown. This is my will. This is now our law." His gaze swept over the nobles, lingering on the known associates of Malcor and Selene. The challenge was unmistakable. He then turned to Soraya, and in a softer voice, meant for her, but heard by all, he said, "Lady Soraya, in accordance with the pact, you are granted the lands and manor of Evergard, east of the capital, for your use and residence. You will have a household guard answerable to the pact's terms. Your work begins now." Lady Soraya. The title was not one of vampire nobility, but a unique honorific for her new station. She curtsied deeply, not as a subject to a king, but as an ally to an ally. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will endeavor to be worthy of this trust." The ceremony was over. The court was dismissed, buzzing with a cacophony of reactions: outrage, curiosity, fear, and from a few, a glimmer of hope. The pact changed everything. Soraya was no longer a problem to be removed. She was an institution to be reckoned with. As they left the hall, Callian walked her to her new quarters, a spacious suite in a different wing, symbolically separate from his, yet still secure. At the door, she paused. Evergard, he said. A peaceful place, green, with a large garden for healing herbs. It was Malcor's. Consider it the first installment of restitution. She almost laughed at the poetic justice. Thank you, Callian, for giving me a path forward, not just a shelter. We have a path forward, together. The shadows will not like it. They will push back harder now. Let them, Soraya said, and the steel in her voice was new, forged in the crucible of the oubliette, the tribunal, and the garden attack. I have a pact to uphold. In her new sitting room, alone for the first time since the ceremony, Soraya looked at the bloody line on her palm, already a faint pink scar. She touched her locket. She was bound now, by magic and oath, to a vampire king and his kingdom. The weight was immense. But for the first time since her arrest, she did not feel like a leaf in a storm. She felt rooted. She had made a choice, and with it taken up a weapon far more powerful than any dagger, legitimate, protected authority. That night, in a secluded manner far from the capital, Lady Selene received the news. She shattered a priceless crystal glass against the fireplace. A pact! He binds her to the realm's magic. The fool! He makes her stronger. Her initial anger of simple elimination was now impossible. To kill Soraya would trigger magical repercussions and grant Callian unlimited cause for retaliation. A sly, calculating look replaced her anger. Very well. If we cannot break the pact by harming her, we must break it by discrediting her. Or, she smiled, a cold, cruel thing, by tempting him to break it himself. Every pact has loopholes. Every heart has weaknesses. We must find Callian's weaknesses and apply the pressure until the precious pact shatters from within. The game had just entered a far more subtle and dangerous phase. The pact of sun and shadow was sealed, but the true test of its strength was yet to come. Evergard was more than Soraya could have dreamed. The manor house was modest by vampire nobility standards, but spacious and airy, built of warm, honey-colored stone. It sat in a gentle valley, its lands including a thriving forest, meadows, and a fast-flowing stream. Best of all were the existing gardens, once ornamental, now overgrown. She saw not weeds, but potential. Her new life began with a flurry of purposeful activity. The household staff assigned to her were initially wary. A human lady bound by an ancient vampire pact was an unprecedented concept. But Soraya's practical nature and clear vision won them over quickly. She didn't want ostentation, she wanted functionality. She turned a sun-drenched salon into a drying room for herbs. The library began to fill with botanical texts she requested from the capital. She hired local woodsmen to build a proper still house and glass houses for delicate plants. Callian visited once a week, always formally, always with an escort, respecting the terms of the pact that granted her autonomy. Their meetings were like strategic councils between allied generals. He would update her on the political landscape, the grumbling of the old families, the progress of the new laws, the quiet ongoing hunt for Lady Selene's network. She would report on Evergard's transformation, show him seedlings, and give him frank advice on how a new tax on medicinal imports would hurt village healers, or how a proposed clean water initiative should be implemented. One afternoon, as they walked through the newly tilled healing garden, Soraya broached a larger idea. The pact says I am to be a bridge. A bridge must be crossed both ways. I want to start a school here, not just for human healers, but to train vampire physicians in human physiology and herbal remedies, and to teach human healers about vampire ailments and the strengths and limits of immortal biology. True exchange. Callian stopped, impressed. You would invite vampires here to learn from you? If they are willing, she said, her eyes shining with the idea. The distrust goes both ways, Callian. This could be a real, tangible step. The first students might be difficult to find, but if we start with those already sympathetic, your court physician, Thesson, has shown interest. Thesson would be an excellent first scholar, Callian agreed, a rare, full smile touching his lips. It was a smile of pride, not possession. You are building something real here, Soraya. Not just a garden, but a living symbol of what the pact can mean. Their companionship was deep, founded on immense respect and a shared, weighty purpose. There was an affection between them, warm and steady, but it remained within the bounds they had set, a partnership, a profound friendship. It was, Soraya often thought, more solid and meaningful than any whirlwind romance could have ever been. But Lady Celine's agents were watching. They saw the king's regular, formal visits. They saw the flourishing of Evergard. They saw the respect growing between the ally and the king, and they devised a new poison. The attack came not with stones, but with paper. An anonymously published broadsheet began circulating in the capital. It didn't attack Soraya directly. Instead, it published a series of historical analyses and lost letters. The narrative was cunning. It painted Lyra, Callian's lost wife, not as a beloved figure, but as a weak, tragic mistake. It suggested her mortality was a fatal flaw that led to Callian's centuries of coldness. It then posed a concerned question. Is history repeating? Is our king, in his admirable but misguided compassion, once again allowing a mortal attachment to blind him to the needs of his immortal people? The pact is noble, but does it tie our kingdom's fate to a fleeting human lifespan? The propaganda was brilliant. It appealed to vampire pride and fear. It didn't say Soraya was evil. It said she was dangerous because she was mortal. It framed her care not as strength, but as a recurrent vulnerability. The whispers started again, now wearing a mask of patriotic concern. Worse, a forged document surfaced, supposedly a fragment of Lyra's diary. In it, a clumsy imitation of a young woman's hand expressed fear of Callian's vampire nature, regret at their union, and a wish for a normal human life. The forgery was poor, but explosive. Callian was furious when Elias showed him the broadsheet and the diary fragment. It was a violation of Lyra's memory, a twisting of his deepest pain into a political weapon. Find the printers, find the scribe who forged this. I want them standing in the Hall of Justice tomorrow, he commanded, his voice trembling with rage. Soraya heard of it when a nervous maid at Evergard brought her a copy of the broadsheet. She read it, her stomach twisting. The attack had shifted. They were no longer trying to kill her body, they were trying to kill her legitimacy and to wound Callian in his most vulnerable place, his love for Lyra. When Callian visited next, the anger was still a dark cloud around him. Soraya met him in her still house, the air fragrant with chamomile and mint. "You've seen it," he stated, not a question. "I have." "They poison her memory," he said, his fists clenched. "They make a mockery of what we had to suit their narrative." Soraya approached him carefully. "Callian, look at me. This is what they want. They want you enraged. They want you to lash out, to look unstable, to confirm their story of a king ruled by mortal sentiment. They want to drive a wedge between us by making you associate me with this desecration." Her calm analysis cut through his fury. He took a deep breath. The scent of herbs helped to clear his mind. "You are right, as always. What do you suggest?" "We do not attack the forgery directly, that gives it oxygen. We ignore the petty broadsheets. Instead, we amplify the truth of the present, double your support for the healing school, issue a royal decree officially endowing it, invite the High Justice to visit Evergard and see the work, show them the future we are building, not the past they are twisting. And perhaps it is time you spoke of Lyra yourself, not in anger, but in truth. Tell your court, tell your people what she truly was, not a weakness, but your strength, a reason to build a kingdom that values life, however long it lasts. He stared at her amazed. In the face of an attack designed to breed jealousy and division, Soraya's response was strategic, compassionate, and utterly devoid of ego. She was protecting him, the pact, and even the memory of the woman whose face she wore. You have the heart of a queen and the mind of a spy master, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I have the heart of a healer, she corrected softly, and I'm trying to heal this rift before it festers. Our pact is strong, Callian, stronger than their lies. Let's prove it to them. He left Evergard that day with his anger transformed into resolve. He followed her counsel. He ignored the scandal sheets. He announced the royal endowment for the Evergard Academy of Integrated Healing. The public response was mixed, but the action was decisive, forward-looking. A week later, during an address to the city governors, he did something he had never done. He spoke of Lyra, briefly, with a quiet dignity that silenced the hall. He spoke of her courage, her laughter, her belief in a better world. Her mortality was not a flaw, it was a reminder, he said, his voice carrying to the rafters. That reminder guides me now, not as a chain to the past, but as a compass for the future. The speech was reprinted and circulated widely. The genuine emotion in it, the lack of bitter retaliation, began to turn public opinion. The shadowy attacks lost their bite in the face of such transparent honesty and positive action. In her manner, Lady Selene read the speech. She crumpled the paper in her hand. Her agent's plan had backfired. Instead of creating discord, it had solidified the alliance and prompted the king to reclaim his own narrative. The mortal woman was proving to be a formidable opponent. Lady Selene needed a new, more direct approach. She needed to find a loophole in the pact itself, a way to force Callian to choose between his kingdom and his ally, and she believed she knew just the pressure point to apply. The first sign of trouble was not at court, but in the earth. Reports trickled into Evergard from nearby villages, crops withering, livestock sickening with a strange, wasting illness. Then the first human cases appeared: fatigue, bruising, a metallic taste in the mouth. Soraya, hearing the symptoms from a worried village elder who came to her gate, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She rode out with her guards to see for herself. The blight was selective, affecting only communities downstream from a particular set of hills that contained old, played-out silver mines once owned by Lord Malcor. She took soil and water samples back to Evergard, her mind working. In her new laboratory, she tested the samples. The results were clear: acute silver poisoning, far beyond natural levels. Someone was deliberately contaminating the watershed. This was no natural disaster. It was an attack on the very people she was sworn to protect. And the method was a cruel echo of the original blight in Oakhaven that had started her ordeal. She sent an urgent message to Callian. He arrived at Evergard within hours, his expression grim. She showed him the evidence. It's deliberate, Callian. Concentrated silver residue, dumped in the headwaters. It's targeting my people, the people I'm supposed to be a bridge to. It's a challenge to the pact. A test. Callian's eyes were lethal. Selene. It has her signature. Cruel, indirect, and politically cunning. She makes it look like an environmental accident, a tragic legacy of Malcor's mines. But the timing is impeccable. She is forcing our hand. We have to act, Soraya said, already packing her healer's satchel with chelating agents and supportive herbs. People are dying. I need to go to the villages, coordinate a response, dig new wells, treat the sick. No, Callian said, the word abrupt. It is too dangerous. If this is Selene's work, the villages will be watched. You would be walking into a trap. Soraya whirled on him. That is exactly what she wants, for you to lock me away in safety, to show that the pact is just words, that when my people are in crisis, their ally is kept in a gilded cage. My duty, under our oath, is to advise and serve them. I cannot serve them from here while they drink poisoned water." It was their first real conflict. Callian, the ancient protector, saw only the threat to her life. Soraya, the healer and now sworn advocate, saw her responsibility to the suffering. "Your duty is to be alive to serve them tomorrow," Callian argued, his voice rising. "And if I hide, the spirit of the pact is broken," Soraya fired back. "They will say the king's human ally is just a pretty symbol, useless in a real crisis. Trust must go both ways, Callian. You must trust me to do the work I swore to do, even if it carries risk, or else this," she jested between them, at Evergard, "is just another beautiful prison." The word prison hung in the air, a painful echo of the oubliette. Callian flinched. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had allowed her to survive the dark. She was not the broken woman he had carried from the dungeon. She was a leader, demanding the right to lead. He closed his eyes, wrestling with 3 centuries of protective instinct. Finally, he spoke, his voice strained. "You will go, but not alone. I am coming with you, and you will have a full contingent of my personal guard. You will follow their security protocols without question. This is not a negotiation." Soraya saw the immense concession in his offer. He was not forbidding her, he was choosing to stand beside her in the danger zone. It was a profound validation of their partnership. "Agreed," she said, her anger melting into resolve. The next days were a whirlwind of exhausting, heartbreaking work. Callian and Soraya became a command team in the field. He used his royal authority to commandeer resources, clean water barrels, teams of diggers, supplies from the capital. He posted guards and had his agents scour the hills for the perpetrators. Soraya moved between villages, setting up treatment tents, directing the digging of new deep wells away from the poisoned streams, using her knowledge to mitigate the poisoning. She worked tirelessly, her green dress stained with mud, her voice growing hoarse from giving instructions and comfort. The villagers, initially terrified to see their vampire king among them, slowly saw the truth. They saw him lifting water barrels alongside human laborers. They saw the fierce protective way his guards encircled Lady Soraya, not to imprison her, but to protect her as she worked. They saw them in constant, respectful consultation. This was no bewitchment. This was a partnership in action. One evening, in a village square lit by torches, an elderly woman, her hands gnarled from the poisoning, approached Callian as he oversaw the distribution of food. She bowed shakily. "Your Majesty, thank you. For the water. For her." She nodded toward Soraya, who was checking a child's pulse. Callian, uncomfortable with such direct gratitude, merely nodded. The woman persisted, her voice a whisper. "My grandmother, she told stories of the old king before you. He would have let us die. He would have called it thinning the herd. You are different. She makes you different." Then she hurried away. The words struck Callian to his core. "She makes you different." It was the same accusation Selene used, but framed as a blessing, not a curse. He looked at Soraya, her face smudged with dirt, utterly focused on healing. In that moment, any last lingering doubt vanished. She was not the replacement for Lyra, nor a political tool. She was the best ally, the truest friend he had ever had. She was making him a better king, a better being. It was then that Kaelin, his spy master, found him. "We found them, sire. A group of mercenaries, paid with Selene's gold. They confessed to dumping the silver tailings. We have them in custody, and we have a location. Lady Selene is not at her manor. She's moved to a fortified lodge near the Blackwood, near the eastern border. She's gathering what remains of Malcor's loyalists." The crisis in the villages was contained. The trap had been sprung, and they had not only avoided it, but won the loyalty of the people. Now it was time to go on the offensive. The poisoned well had been a vile act, but it had proven the strength of the pact in the crucible of real-world crisis. Now they had to cut the head off the serpent. Callian returned to Soraya's side. "The source of the poison has been caught, and we know where Selene is hiding. The villages are stable.
Your work here is a masterpiece of healing and leadership." Soraya looked up, exhaustion and triumph in her eyes. "What now?" "Now," Callian said, his voice dropping to a low, determined tone. "We end this, together. We take the fight to the heart of the shadow. Are you ready, Lady Soraya?" She straightened her shoulders, touching the silver locket at her throat. The scent of willow bark seemed to carry the strength of the forest itself. "I am ready, for the pact, for the kingdom." The healing phase was over. The time for the final confrontation had arrived.
The Blackwood lived up to its name. Ancient, dense trees canopied the land in perpetual twilight, their trunks as thick as castle towers. It was a place of old magic and older fears, a perfect refuge for those who thrived in shadows. Kallian's force was small but elite. His personal guard, Kylan and a handful of his best agents, and Soraya. She had insisted on coming. "The pact binds us," she argued. "My place is at your side, especially when facing the one who seeks to destroy what we've built. I am not a soldier, but I am a part of this." He could not refuse. Her presence, though it multiplied his fear for her safety, also felt right. This was their battle. They moved through the forest like ghosts. Kallian's senses were extended to their limits, parsing every rustle, every scent. The lodge, when they found it, was a grim, blocky structure built into the base of a cliff, more fortress than retreat. Light gleamed from narrow windows, guards patrolled the perimeter, not professional soldiers, but hard-looking mercenaries and fanatical-looking vampire retainers. Kylan slipped away to disable the outer sentries with silent efficiency. Kallian gave the signal. The assault was not a siege, it was a precise, violent key turning in a lock. His guards engaged the perimeter forces with controlled brutality, creating a diversion. Kallian, with Soraya and two of his most trusted protectors, moved like a shadow to a side entrance Kylan had identified as less guarded. Inside the lodge was a warren of dark wood and hunting trophies. They encountered resistance almost immediately, a pair of vampires loyal to the old ways. Kallian moved with terrifying speed and power, disarming and disabling them without killing blows. He was enforcing justice, not engaging in a massacre. Soraya stayed close to his back, a small dagger in her hand, a gift from him, more for symbolism than practical use, but she held it with grim determination. They fought their way toward the heart of the lodge, following the pull of arrogant power that could only be Lady Selene. They found her in a great room lined with books and weapon racks. She was not alone. A dozen of her most devoted followers stood with her, armed and ready. Selene herself was a handsome, severe woman in her apparent 40s, her eyes burning with fanatical conviction. "King Kallian," she said, her voice dripping with false courtesy. "And you brought the mortal pet. How dramatic." "This ends now, Selene," Kallian said, his sword held low but ready. "Your poisoning of my subjects, your plots, your lies. You are under arrest for treason, conspiracy to murder, and crimes against the realm." Selene laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Treason? I am preserving the realm. From you, you who would shackle our immortal destiny to the fleeting whims of mortals. You who let a human face blind you. She is the key. Remove her and the king returns to his senses. The pact is an aberration." One of her followers, a huge vampire with a scarred face, lunged not at Kallian, but directly at Soraya. It was a coordinated move. While Kallian was distracted, two others attacked him from the sides. The room erupted into chaos. Kallian became a whirlwind of motion, parrying blows, his focus split between his own defense and Soraya's. His guard fought fiercely beside him. Soraya, backed against the bookcase, held up her dagger as the scarred vampire advanced on her, a cruel smile on his lips. "No need for that, little witch. This will be quick." But Soraya was not the woman from the oubliette. She had faced down a tribunal, built a school, healed poisoned villages. Fear was present, but it did not rule her. As he reached for her, she didn't try to stab him, a futile gesture against a vampire. Instead, she threw the contents of a small pouch she had pulled from her belt directly into his face. It was a concentrated powder of ground garlic, wolfsbane, and holy basil, a potent, irritating mix meant to distract, not harm. The vampire roared, clawing at his burning eyes, temporarily blinded. In that moment of his distraction, Kalian, having dispatched one attacker and wounded another, broke through and placed himself between Soraya and her assailant. With a single powerful motion, he disarmed the scarred vampire and slammed him against the wall, rendering him unconscious. The tide of the melee turned. Kylan and the guards finished subduing the others. Soon, only Lady Selene remained standing, surrounded, her defiance crumbling into panic. "It's over, Selene," Kalian said, heavily breathing. Selene's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. There was none. Her gaze then landed on Soraya, who stood firm beside Kalian, the empty powder pouch in her hand. A final, desperate hatred contorted Selene's features. You mortal insect, you have cost us everything." In a last furious act, she drew a hidden needle-thin dagger from her sleeve and flung it with deadly accuracy, not at Kalian, but at Soraya's heart. Time slowed. Kalian moved to intercept, but he was at the wrong angle. Soraya saw the glint of steel. Instinct took over. She twisted, but not fast enough. The dagger grazed her upper arm, slicing through fabric and skin. She cried out, more in shock than in pain. But Selene's scream was louder. A searing golden light erupted from the shallow crack on Soraya's arm. The light traced the path of the wound, then flared outward in a silent, brilliant pulse that filled the room. It was the magic of the pact, the mingled blood oath reacting to a lethal attack on its sworn ally. The light struck Lady Selene. She didn't burn or explode. She simply froze. A look of utter shock was etched on her face. Then a network of fine gold cracks appeared across her skin, like porcelain. She stood rigid for a second before crumbling silently into a pile of ash and fine glittering dust. The ancient magic of the pact had delivered its promised wrath. Silence descended, broken only by the heavy breathing of the combatants. The remaining conspirators stared in terror at the pile of dust that was their leader. Soraya looked from her bleeding arm to the ashes, then to Kalian, her eyes wide with shock. The cut was shallow, already clotting. The light faded, leaving the scent of ozone and old parchment in the air. Kalian stepped over to her, his concern for her injury overriding everything else. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she breathed, still stunned. "The pact, it protected you," he finished, awe in his voice. He had known the magic was potent, but to see it enacted so decisively was staggering. The pact was not just a piece of paper, it was a living, reactive force. An attack on Soraya had resulted in the attacker's utter annihilation. He turned to the captured conspirators, his voice ringing with final authority. "Let this be witnessed and remembered. The pact of sun and shadow is inviolate. Lady Selene's fate is the fate of any who raise a hand against my sworn ally. The Shadow War is over. You will face justice, but you will live to tell of what you saw here today." The journey back to Viridian Spire was solemn but triumphant. The head of the conspiracy was gone, her network rounded up. The tale of the pact's magic would spread faster than any whisper, a deterrent more powerful than any army. Weeks later, peace had truly settled. The new laws lay full effect. The Evergarde Academy had its first mixed class of vampire and human students. Soraya stood on her balcony at Evergarde, watching the sun set over her healing gardens. The silver locket was at her throat. The faint scar on her arm was a reminder, not of fear, but of a bond that had proven stronger than hatred. Kalian visited as he often did. They stood together in companionable silence, looking at the world they had helped save and reshape. The court is quiet. The reforms are taking root. You have done what you set out to do, Soraya. You have healed more than just villages. She smiled, a true, peaceful smile. We did it, Kallian, together, just as the pact promised. He looked at her, this mortal woman who had cracked the ice of his heart and helped him forge a kingdom worthy of its name. The love he felt for her was profound, but it was not the passionate, romantic love he had for Lyra. It was something deeper, rarer, a love of shared purpose, of immense respect, of souls aligned in the pursuit of light. It was the love of true partners. The pact was for mutual aid and protection. It never said anything about an end date. Soraya met his gaze, understanding dawning. Are you suggesting we make it permanent? I am suggesting, he said, taking her hand gently, the touch a seal of their trust, that some alliances are not just for solving a crisis, they are the foundation upon which a better age is built. I cannot imagine building this future without you at my side, as my ally, as my friend, as the conscience of my kingdom. Tears of joy, clear and bright, filled Soraya's green eyes. This was the choice she had made in the dark, not knowing where it would lead. It had led her here.